Ending with a Flourish, History and Development of Decorative Endpapers from a Practical Measure to Embellish Design Space Used in Children's Literary Interpretation, from Adara North. The contents of this presentation are listed here. Please read along if you're able. They are as follows: Introduction, Research Questions, Historical Summary, Timeline Graphics including scans, Research Questions Revisited, Conclusion and Creative Applications, and finally citations. The introduction section gives a brief overview of what the aim of this project is, a summary of the content you will find within the LibGuide, and the guiding curiosity behind it. As such, this project will be giving an overview of the transformation of end papers or end leaves in bookbinding, from a functional piece of book construction to a design space which can be applied in literary skill development and discussion for children. There is some academic writing on the latter topic, which will be noted in the supplemental material section of the LibGuide. I will also briefly touch upon the shifting popularity in decorative end leaves and the parallel rise and fall of national or global economics. Next, let's look at the research questions which guided my queries. 1. What was the original purpose of end papers or end leaves, and when did they evolve into decorative platforms? 2. How has the presentation or design of end leaves in children's books shifted in the past 50 to 100 years? Sub-question: what are the driving factors for that change? 3. In what way can end papers be utilized in a classroom or instructional setting? Sub-question: how is there a narrative relationship between the designs on end papers and the text within the book? We'll begin by answering the first research question to give end papers their context in the history of the book and bookbinding. To that end, end papers have historically served a practical role in bookbinding by protecting the text block from wear and helping to secure it to the cover. They were often made from scrap paper, parchment, or vellum, and could include book plates or marks from binders and owners. Over time, especially around the 17th century in Europe, end papers began shifting from purely functional to more decorative, with materials like marbled paper, silk moire, and printed patterns becoming popular. The rise of printing in the 18th and 19th century made elaborate designs more common, including florals, geometric repeatings, and specialty marbling styles like Turkish stone or vein d'or. End papers also became a space for functional illustrations, such as maps in books like Winnie the Pooh or Davy Crockett. Today, although detailed end papers can be more costly to produce, there is a growing appreciation for their aesthetic and literary value in book design. Please read the bullet points or pause here to see them listed. Now let's look at some of the examples in the historical end papers I just mentioned. Here you will see the French curl pattern on the left and a Turkish stone pattern on the right. We can also look at the Spanish moire pattern on the left and the vein d'or design on the right. These would have been made in a similar fashion as other forms of marble printing. As noted in the historical overview, end papers originally served a protective and structural role, safeguarding the interior pages of books through handling and wear. In early medieval codices, these were often made from scraps and left undecorated. But by the 17th century, decorative techniques like marbling began to appear in Western bookbinding, likely influenced by older traditions. One of the earliest forms, Japanese suminagashi, meaning ink floating, dates back to the 10th century and used floating ink to create soft, swirling patterns. Artists would carefully place drops of ink onto the surface of the water and lightly blow to form delicate smoke-like patterns. A sheet of paper was then gently placed on top of the water to absorb the design, and slowly lifted to reveal the transferred print. This method later evolved into Ebru in Turkey and eventually inspired European marbling practices, like those seen here. By the late 18th century, lavishly decorated end papers became a sign of fine craftsmanship. These intricate designs, such as marbled, printed, or patterned end papers, eventually found their way into children's books, which were becoming a popular and growing literary market in the mid to late 19th century. Here I have created a condensed timeline of children's picture books that I had in my home collection. I tried to select one per decade if possible to give a snapshot of end papers in that era. I will say that this is by no means an exhaustive list of end sheets. There are exceptions to every rule, and the patterns I noticed in my collection likely could shift if other books were introduced. Let's take a closer look at some of the end pages here. I noted that some of my earlier printed books from the 1940s and 50s have brightly printed end papers with colors that appear to be overlaid. They are highly decorative and mirror the content and mood of their respective books. The more plain sheets I had in my collection were from the 1970s and early 80s. I didn't know if this was a coincidence or a cause-effect relationship with the climate of world economics at that time. In my LibGuide, I give mention to the Great Inflation from 1965 to 1962, which is mentioned on the Federal Reserve History website. This correlation could warrant further research and a look into publishing companies' margins and expenditures at that time. Moving on to the right side of this slide, there are a couple publications from the early and late 1990s. The top one is Angelina Ice Skates by Catherine Hollibird, and the bottom right is Gingerbread Baby from Jan Brett. In these selected end papers, you can see characters from Angelina Ballerina, and in the Gingerbread Baby, there is an exact setting from the text. We are starting to see a revival and connection between end papers and their stories. In 2018 on the left, and 2022 on the right, there is a resurgence in the movement to use end papers as an artistic space similar to covers and dust jackets. The cohesion with the text is really starting to feel very natural. I found that out and about, quite a few children's books have some sort of design on their end papers, even if they are a bit on the plain side. They are more like a nod to older printed end papers with repeating motifs from the late 1800s. Moving on to young adult end sheets, I wanted to use these books to fill in gaps that had been left by the children's picture books in my collection. This timeline will show you a brief overview, and feel free to pause if you need to. The enlarged examples here show the end papers of Defoe's Robinson Crusoe from 1946 publication. The colors here are again incredibly vivid and look like the artwork was originally done in some sort of gouache or acrylic paint, and then reprinted. The attention to detail is stunning in person. On the opposite side of this slide is a reprinting of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. The illustrations here on these end sheets are all related to the text in the story. With a class or children's literary workshop, it would be a great conversation starter to discuss predictions about the book's content. On this slide are examples of maps as end papers. One is from Davy Crockett's reprinting in 1955, and on the right, a reprint of Winnie the Pooh from 1988. In both books, these end pages are necessary to the telling of the story and could be used in a teaching lesson around world building and mapping where the characters go within the text. Next, these showcase a snapshot from the latter half of the 20th century and early part of the 21st. You can see a brief downturn in design around 2006, right before the Great Recession. Again, this isn't a correlation that is an exact science, but it does bear mentioning that design is often sacrificed to content production in the face of growing costs. Here is a second research question to revisit. In this section, I've outlined 3 main points I derived from the research done. In the LibGuide, there is more detailed information given, but in summary, one might say that over the past several decades, end papers in children's books have evolved from simple patterns onto important storytelling elements. In the early to mid-20th century, printed designs like florals or foliage were common, mostly serving a decorative or traditional purpose. As picture books became more immersive, end papers began to reflect the story itself through maps, character illustrations, or scenes that hint at what is to come. They now help young readers engage with the narrative before the first page is even turned. While economic factors have occasionally led to simpler, solid-color end papers, there is a growing return to more intentional design. Today, the end papers are seen as part of the book's full visual experience, encouraging deeper interaction and creativity in young readers. Now we have come to the part of the PowerPoint and project that I am still in progress. I have answered this question partly within my LibGuide for children's books, but I haven't yet done a deep dive into the YA novel aspect of this question. This is the space where I will mention typology of end papers as outlined by Duran and Bosch. There is a graphic for this in my LibGuide, so yes, I will be completing it in the coming days and updating my PowerPoint and LibGuide accordingly. Stay tuned. Again, here I will be listing exhibitions I have found from academic institutions on end papers as a resource for folks, as well as a short creative activity. I'd like to do some sort of homemade marbling activity, even if it isn't suminagashi. The conclusion drawn is that end paper design represents an underutilized artistic and educational space within bookbinding, particularly in children's literature. Despite economic constraints often limiting their inclusion, there is a strong potential for end papers to be recognized as an essential tool for early literacy and reader engagement, much like a book's cover. My hope is that in the future, publishers, printers, and readers will see them as a vital part of learning for young children. Thank you for joining me, and the link to the LibGuide will be live soon.